The 742 from King's Cross was not a train people remembered for the right reasons. It ran north through the long, unlit stretch of country between Hatfield and Hitchin, and on certain November nights, when the fog pressed itself against the windows like something living, passengers spoke afterward of feeling unaccountably watched. But on the night of the 14th, the train carried something stranger than a feeling. It carried a man who entered a locked first-class compartment after the whistle blew, and who, 23 minutes later, was gone. There was no broken glass. There were no marks on the door. The window latches were fastened from the inside, exactly as the conductor had set them at Welwyn. The compartment held only a folded gray overcoat, a half-finished cup of tea cooling against the mahogany shelf, and a single brass cufflink lying on the seat where the man had been sitting. The cufflink was engraved with 2 letters that did not match the name on his ticket. His ticket said, Mr. Edmund Rourke. The cufflink said, Th. By the time the train reached Hitchin, the conductor had already knocked twice, called out once, and finally used his master key. He stood in the doorway of the empty compartment for nearly a full minute before he remembered to breathe. Then he went forward very slowly to the station master's office and asked in a voice that did not entirely belong to him whether anyone in London was acquainted with Mr. Sherlock Holmes. It was past midnight when the telegram arrived at Baker Street, and I confess I was the one who answered it, since Holmes had been working through a small chemical problem involving the residues of 3 different brands of black tea, and was disinclined to be interrupted by anything ordinary. The telegram was not ordinary. He read it once, set down his glass pipette, and said only, "We will need warmer coats, Watson. The Northern Line is unkind to the lungs." We caught the early train at 5. Holmes spent the journey in a silence that I had learned, over the years, to recognize as the silence of a man already partway into a case he had not yet seen. He stared at the fogged window, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the leather armrest, and once or twice he murmured the initials Th as if testing them against the air. "You are wondering," I said, "what name those letters belong to." "I am wondering," Holmes replied, "what name they used to belong to. A cufflink engraved with initials is not a recent purchase. A man does not commission such things to match a false identity. He commissions them to match the self he was born into, which means our missing Mr. Rourke was carrying on his very wrists the truth he had spent considerable effort burying. Then he was running from something. Most men on night trains are running from something, Watson. The interesting question is what was running after him. The fog at Hitchin Station was the color of unwashed linen. The station master, a thin man named Pellet with an apologetic mustache, met us on the platform and walked us in silence to the siding where the carriage in question had been uncoupled and held under lamp. He had the bearing of a man who had spent the night rehearsing what he would say and had now forgotten all of it. The carriage itself was a beautiful wounded thing. Polished walnut paneling, brass fittings dulled by use, gas lamps still faintly glowing in their frosted glass. 6 compartments, each with its own door to the corridor and its own window to the night. The 4th compartment, the one we were here for, had been sealed since the train arrived. Holmes stood at its threshold for a long moment without entering. "Tell me again," he said, "exactly what you saw." Pellet swallowed. "The conductor, Mr. Briggs, he had checked the tickets at Welwyn. Mr. Rourke was sitting where you see the cufflink now, by the window, facing forward. He had asked for tea. Briggs brought it himself, set it on the shelf, and locked the corridor door from outside, as Mr. Rourke requested. He liked his privacy, did Mr. Rourke. He had traveled this line before? 3 times in the last month, sir. Always the same compartment, always the same request." Holmes's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, and between Welwyn and Hitchin, the train made no stops. "None, sir. 23 minutes of open track. Briggs was in the corridor the whole time. He swears no one came in or out of that compartment. The door was locked from the corridor side, and the windows, well, you can see for yourself." We stepped inside. The compartment smelled of cold tea, pipe ash, and something else, something faintly floral that did not belong in a man's first-class carriage. Holmes knelt by the seat and lifted the cufflink with the tip of his pencil, turning it slowly under the lamp. Gold, but worn. The engraving is 15 years old, perhaps 20. The catch is bent inward, as if pulled at an awkward angle. He did not lose it, Watson. He removed it and left it. Or someone removed it for him. A signature? A confession, more likely. Or a summons. He set the cufflink down and turned his attention to the overcoat. It was folded with a strange precision across the opposite seat, as though laid out for inspection. The lining was gray silk, slightly frayed at the collar, and from the inner pocket, Holmes drew out a small leather-bound notebook with a black ribbon marker. The book contained no names, only dates, prices, and the names of public houses. 3 months of careful notation, ending 2 days before our journey. On the final page, in handwriting that had begun steady and gone unsteady halfway through, were 5 words. If she writes again, run. Holmes closed the book gently and slipped it into his own coat. Mr. Rourke was being hunted by a letter, Watson. We must find out what the letter said and who wrote it. And we must do this before anyone else on that train decides they would rather we did not. Anyone else on the train? There were 4 other first-class passengers, Pellet tells me. They are being held in the waiting room at the inn across the road. None of them, of course, has anything to do with it. He smiled, very faintly. They are entirely innocent. They have all assured the station master of this several times each. I have been with Holmes long enough to know that when innocent people insist upon their innocence in chorus, it is generally because at least one of them has reason to fear being heard alone. The Brindle Inn sat across from the station like a tired old dog that had given up watching the road. Its low ceilings had absorbed 2 centuries of pipe smoke, and its private parlor, where the 4 passengers waited, smelled of damp wool and unspoken thoughts. Holmes paused outside the door for a moment, listening. They are not speaking to each other, he murmured. 4 strangers, held together for 6 hours, and not one is making conversation. That, Watson, is already a clue. He opened the door. The first passenger was a woman of perhaps 45, dressed in mourning that was not quite fresh. Her gloves were black, but the cuffs of her sleeves were gray, as though she had been in half mourning long enough to forget which half. She sat very upright, hands folded, and her eyes met Holmes's with a directness that surprised me. She introduced herself as Mrs. Adelaide Vance, widow, traveling north to visit a cousin in Peterborough. The second was a young man, no older than 26, with the soft hands of a clerk and the restless eyes of a gambler. He gave his name as Mr. Julian Petrie and offered, unprompted, that he was in the wine trade. He offered this 3 times in the first 2 minutes. The third was a clergyman. He was older, perhaps 60, with a face like a thoughtful pear and the still posture of a man accustomed to listening to confessions without flinching. The Reverend Mr. Alistair Cobb, vicar of a small parish near Stevenage, returning home after a visit to a sick brother in Islington. His collar was clean. His shoes were not. The fourth was a tall, narrow gentleman in his mid-50s, with iron gray hair, a military bearing, and the kind of mustache that belonged to a portrait rather than a face. He gave his name as Colonel Henry Strake, retired, and said nothing more. He did not ask why we had come. He did not ask when he might leave. He sat with his hands on his knees and watched the door. Holmes greeted each in turn with the courtesy of a man who had already decided which of them was lying about what, and was now only confirming the order. "I shall not detain you long," he said. "I require only that each of you tell me, in your own words, what you saw of the gentleman in the 4th compartment." There was a small collective intake of breath. Mrs. Vance spoke first. "I did not see him. I was in compartment 2, and I kept my door closed. I am not in the habit of observing strangers." "And yet," Holmes said gently, "you have just told me which compartment was his." She blinked. The pause was perhaps half a second. The conductor mentioned it when he came to ask if I had seen anything. Of course. Holmes's tone did not change. Mr. Petrie? The young man laughed too quickly. I saw him bored, I suppose. Tall fellow, gray overcoat, hat pulled low. Didn't look at anyone. Went straight to his compartment. I thought, there's a man who doesn't want company, and I thought, neither do I. And that was that? Where were you seated? Compartment 6, the last one. And you remained there throughout? I did. Petrie smiled, showing teeth. I had a flask. I had the evening paper. I had no reason to wonder. The Reverend Cobb folded his hands. I was in compartment 3, directly beside Mr. Rourke's. I heard him enter. I heard him ask the conductor for tea. After that, I heard nothing. I read my prayer book, and I closed my eyes, and I prayed, as I always do on night journeys, for safe passage. I am sorry to say I cannot help you further. Holmes inclined his head and turned to the colonel. Strake did not answer at once. When he did, his voice was low and surprisingly soft, like a man who had once shouted across parade grounds and had since learned not to. I saw him on the platform at King's Cross. I saw him bored. I did not speak to him. I was in compartment 1 at the front of the carriage. I heard nothing of consequence. I have nothing to add. You saw him on the platform, Holmes repeated. Did you recognize him? The colonel's face did not move. No. Are you quite certain? I am certain. Holmes studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled, that small, courteous smile he reserved for the moments when he had just caught something and was choosing not to display it yet. Thank you, Colonel. You have all been most helpful. I shall ask you to remain at the inn for the present. I expect we shall speak again before the day is out. In the corridor outside, with the door closed behind us, Holmes stood for a moment with his eyes shut. All 4 of them are lying, Watson, but only one of them is lying about the train. If you have ever sat on a slow railway carriage at night and watched the lamps of small stations slide past without stopping, you will know the particular loneliness of being a passenger between places. It is in that loneliness that this story lives, and I would ask you, as we move deeper into it, to stay with the rhythm of it. Some mysteries reward patience in a way that hurry never could. Let the fog do its work. Holmes spent the next hour in the empty carriage, alone. He had asked even Pellet to wait outside. When I rejoined him, he was on his hands and knees on the floor of the 4th compartment, examining the carpet with a small magnifying lens. A woman was in this compartment, Watson. Mrs. Vance. Possibly. The fibers I have lifted are from a wool skirt of a deep green. Mrs. Vance is in morning black. But the floral scent that lingers here is not hers either. Mrs. Vance smells of camphor and old lavender. This is something newer. Rosewater and bergamot, expensively blended. A woman of means. A woman who, I would guess, has not been in mourning for anything in some time. Then there was a 5th passenger. There was a visitor, not a passenger. The distinction matters. He rose, dusting his knees. Observe the seat opposite Mr. Rourke's. The cushion is depressed, but the depression is shallow and brief. Someone sat there for perhaps 5 minutes, no more. The tea on the shelf was made for one. Mr. Rourke did not offer his guest refreshment, which suggests the meeting was not friendly, and yet she stayed long enough to speak with him. Or to give him something. Or to take something. Holmes held up the cufflink again. He did not remove this for vanity. He removed it because she asked him to. Because she wished to confirm what she already suspected. T.H. Watson. What name in recent memory carries those initials and the smell of disgrace? I thought for a long moment. Thaddeus Hollander. Holmes nodded slowly. The banker. 3 years ago. The fraudulent investment scheme that ruined 19 families in Surrey. He fled the country before the trial. He was reported drowned in the Channel. He was never found. Bodies pulled from the channel rarely are. Holmes slipped the cufflink into a small silk pouch. I think, Watson, that Mr. Edmund Rourke was Thaddeus Hollander, and that he had been hiding in plain sight on a Welland to Hitchin night train for some weeks, and that a woman with rosewater on her gloves came aboard somewhere along the line, recognized him, and gave him a choice. What choice? That is what we must discover. But first, we must find out how a man can vanish from a locked compartment with the windows latched from the inside, because until we know how, we cannot prove who. We returned to the carriage that afternoon with fresh eyes. Holmes worked methodically through every compartment, beginning with the first. Colonel Strake's compartment was austere to the point of severity. A folded newspaper, perfectly aligned with the edge of the seat, an empty glass, no personal items. The colonel traveled, it seemed, as though he carried nothing he was not prepared to abandon at any moment. Mrs. Vance's compartment, the second, told a more complicated story. She had taken tea, but she had not drunk it. The cup was half full and cold. The milk had separated. She had been writing. There were faint indentations on the small fold-down table, the ghosts of words pressed through paper. Holmes laid a sheet of his own notebook over the indentations and rubbed gently with the side of a pencil. The shadow of a sentence emerged. I cannot do it. I cannot face him. She wrote this, Holmes murmured, and then she tore the page out. She did not throw the page away in the carriage, so she carried it with her, or she destroyed it elsewhere. Either way, she came onto this train intending to face someone, and she lost her nerve. Rourke? Or Hollander. Continue. The third compartment, the Reverend's, was almost touchingly neat. A worn prayer book on the seat, a pair of reading spectacles folded into the binding, a small paper bag containing 2 boiled sweets. Nothing remarkable, except that the prayer book, when Holmes lifted it, fell open to a page that had been read many times. The page contained the parable of the prodigal son. The margin held a single penciled word, in handwriting so faint it was almost invisible. Forgive. The fourth compartment we already knew. The fifth was empty and unused. The sixth, Mr. Petrie's, smelled of cheap brandy and tobacco. There were ash burns on the upholstery, a racing form heavily marked, a torn bedding slip, and beneath the seat, half hidden against the wall, a small silver flask, recently emptied. The flask was engraved with the monogram of a London club, to which, Holmes informed me, Mr. Petrie almost certainly did not belong. He stole it, I said. Or he won it, or he was given it by someone who wished to be rid of him. Mr. Petrie is a man living above his means and below his pretensions. He is interesting, but I do not yet know if he is relevant. Holmes returned to the corridor and stood for a long time looking down its length. The carriage was perhaps 40 feet long. The corridor ran along one side. The compartments opened onto it in sequence. At one end was the door to the next carriage. At the other was the door to the platform, the door through which all passengers had boarded and through which, ostensibly, none had left. The conductor stood here, Holmes said, indicating a spot near the center of the corridor. From this position, he could see both ends of the train. He swears no one passed him. I believe him. Then how? Watson, when a man tells you he saw nothing pass him in a corridor, he means he saw no stranger pass him. He does not mean he saw no one at all. Tell me, would Briggs have remarked upon Mrs. Vance walking from her compartment to the lavatory at the end of the carriage? Probably not. Would he have remarked upon the Reverend Cobb stepping out for a moment to stretch his legs? Probably not. Would he have remarked upon Colonel Strake, who travels this line often and tips well, walking from his compartment to ask the conductor a small question about the timing at Hitchin? I began to see. You think one of them passed him. I think more than one of them passed him. I think, Watson, that the trick of this case is not how a man vanished, but how 4 people moved in a corridor for 3 minutes each without any of them being noticed, because each of them was, in their own quiet way, expected. That evening we dined at the Brindle Inn, in a small private room Holmes had requested for the purpose. He had asked Pellet to send word to each of the 4 passengers that they might leave on the morning train, but that, before they did, he would be grateful for a brief private word with each. He saw them in the order in which they had spoken that morning, and he saw them alone. I waited in the parlor with a pot of tea and the door slightly ajar, because Holmes had asked me to listen, and because I have learned that what people say to Holmes when they believe they are alone with him is often more useful than what they say in company. Mrs. Vance came first. "Mr. Holmes," she said, and her voice was steadier than it had been in the morning, "you have something to ask me." "I have something to tell you, Mrs. Vance. The man in the 4th compartment was not Mr. Edmund Rourke. He was Thaddeus Hollander. I believe you knew this before you boarded the train." There was a long silence. When she spoke again, her voice had gone very small. "My husband died because of him. Not on the day of the fraud. 2 months later. He could not bear the shame of having recommended Hollander's scheme to our friends. He walked into the Thames on a Sunday morning in his Sunday coat, and he did not come out. The coroner was kind. He called it an accident. I have worn black for him for 3 years, and I have not been able to take it off, because every time I think of leaving mourning, I think of the man who is still alive who put my husband in the river." "You wrote to Hollander?" "I wrote to Mr. Rourke. I did not know at first that they were the same. I am a woman of certain means and certain connections, Mr. Holmes, and I have spent 3 years asking quiet questions. 6 months ago, a clerk in a shipping office in Hull told me that a man matching Hollander's description had taken a position under the name Rourke, and that he traveled south once a month to a private business address in London. I followed him. I learned his routine. I wrote him a letter. What did the letter say? It said that I knew who he was. It said that I would be on the 7:42 from King's Cross on the night of the 14th, in compartment 2, and that if he wished to keep his secret, he would come and speak with me before Hitchin. I did not know what I would do when he came. I thought perhaps I would only look at him. I thought perhaps I would be satisfied to have him know that someone, somewhere, still remembered." "And did he come?" She was silent for a long moment. "No. I lost my nerve, Mr. Holmes. I sat in my compartment, and I wrote a note that said I could not do it, and I tore the note up. When the train reached Hitchin and I heard the commotion, I thought at first that he had killed himself. I thought I had driven him to it. I have been sitting in this inn all day, waiting to be told that I am a murderer. You are not a murderer, Mrs. Vance, but you are not the only person on that train who came to confront him." She looked up sharply. "Who else?" "That, madam, is what I am still determining. I will ask you only one more question. The cufflink in his compartment was engraved T.H. Did you know about the cufflinks?" "Yes. My husband owned a pair. Hollander gave them to all his closest investors as gifts, the year before the collapse. My husband's pair is in a drawer in my dressing room. He could not bear to wear them after, but he could not bear to throw them away either." "Thank you, Mrs. Vance. You have been more helpful than you know." She left. Through the crack in the door, I could see that she was weeping, but quietly, the way people weep when they have been doing it for a long time and have learned how to keep it from showing on their faces. Mr. Petrie came next, and Mr. Petrie was a different sort of conversation entirely. He sat down with the easy posture of a man who has been interviewed by his betters before and intends to be charming his way out of it. He smiled. He offered Holmes a cigarette from a case that, I noted, did not match his clothes. Holmes declined. "Mr. Petrie, you are not in the wine trade." The smile faltered. "I beg your pardon?" "Your hands have not handled crates. Your shoes have not walked cellars. Your knowledge of wine, judging from the conversation you attempted with the innkeeper this afternoon, would not survive a serious examination. You are not in the wine trade. What are you in?" Petrie laughed, but it was a thinner laugh now. "I am between situations, Mr. Holmes. You are a runner. You carry messages and small parcels for men who do not wish to be seen carrying them themselves. You travel on Northern night trains because it is on those trains that certain transactions are easiest to arrange. The flask under your seat is not yours. The betting slip is not yours either. It is a code. And the man in compartment 4 was, until last night, one of your clients. The young man's face had gone the color of old paper. I did not kill him. I know. You have not the nerve, Mr. Petrie, and you have not the imagination. But you knew he was on that train, and you knew why. Because you delivered to him 3 weeks ago a letter from a woman in mourning. You delivered another 2 weeks ago from a different sender. And last night you delivered a third. How? Your notebook, Mr. Petrie. I have not seen it. But you have one. Men in your trade always do. And you marked the dates in your racing form because you have learned that a man who keeps 2 separate sets of records keeps neither of them well. Tell me about the third letter. Petrie put his head in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was muffled. I don't know who it was from. They never tell me. A gentleman gave it to me at the King's Cross bookstall yesterday afternoon. He paid me 3 sovereigns to put it into Mr. Rourke's hand before Welwyn. He said Mr. Rourke would be expecting it. And was he? He took it without a word. He read it in front of me. He went very still. Then he said very quietly, Tell him I will come. He gave me a sovereign for the trouble? What did the man at the bookstall look like? Petrie hesitated. Tall? Older. Military bearing, I should say. Gray hair? The kind of mustache you only see in old paintings. He didn't give a name. He didn't need to. He was the sort of man who expects to be obeyed. Holmes did not move. Thank you, Mr. Petrie. You will remain at this inn until tomorrow morning. If you attempt to leave before then, I shall make certain that every constable between here and London knows your face by breakfast. Is that clear? It was clear. The Reverend Cobb came third. He sat down with the patience of a man who had been waiting all day to be asked the right question. He folded his hands in his lap. He looked at Holmes with eyes that were tired but not afraid. Mr. Holmes, I have been preparing what I would say to you since the conductor first knocked on my compartment door. I find now that I have prepared nothing at all. So I shall simply tell you the truth, and you may do with it what you will. Please. Thaddeus Hollander was my brother. Even from the parlor I felt the air in the room change. My mother married twice, the Reverend said. Her first husband, Thaddeus's father, was a man of weak character and considerable charm. He left her when Thaddeus was 4. She married my father 2 years later, and I was born the year after that. We were raised as full brothers, though we shared only a mother. I went into the church. He went into finance. We did not see each other often as adults. When the scandal broke 3 years ago, I prayed for him every night. When he was reported drowned, I grieved him. I grieved him sincerely, Mr. Holmes, because whatever else he was the boy who taught me to ride a bicycle, and the young man who stood beside me at our mother's funeral. When did you learn he was alive? 6 weeks ago. A letter arrived at my vicarage, unsigned. It said only, Your brother is not dead. He travels north on Tuesday nights. If you wish to see him before God does, board the 742. I did not know who sent it. I do not know now. And you boarded. I have boarded 3 times, Mr. Holmes. 3 Tuesdays in a row. The first time, I lost my courage and stayed in my compartment. The second time, I knocked on his door and he did not answer, though I could hear him breathing on the other side. Last night was the 3rd time. Last night, I went to his compartment with the intention of telling him that I forgave him, and that our mother, before she died, had asked me to find him and tell him that she did too. Did you reach him? I knocked. He opened the door. He looked at me, and for a moment, his face was the face of the boy I had known. Then it closed, the way a window closes when someone inside does not wish to be seen. He said, I am sorry, Father. You have the wrong compartment. And he closed the door. What did you do? I went back to my compartment. I knelt on the floor. I prayed. I prayed for him to find the courage to be himself one more time before he died. I did not know, Mr. Holmes, that he would die so soon. Reverend, did you see anyone else in the corridor? The old man closed his eyes. I saw a woman. She passed me as I was returning to my compartment. She was wearing a dark green traveling coat and a small hat with a black feather. She smelled of rosewater. She walked toward the front of the carriage. I did not see her face. I assumed she was going to the lavatory. Was she on the train at King's Cross? I do not know. I do not think so. I think she boarded at Welwyn. That is impossible. The train made no stops at Welwyn except for the conductor's check. No new passenger boarded there. The Reverend opened his eyes. Then I do not know how she came to be in the corridor, Mr. Holmes. I only know that she was there. It is at this point in a case, when the impossible has become not less impossible but more so, that Holmes is at his most still. He thanked the Reverend gently and saw him to the door. When he returned to his chair, he sat for a long time without speaking. I have asked you, in the course of this story, to stay with the fog and to trust the rhythm. I shall ask you now to do something a little harder. I shall ask you, before the next door opens, to consider how easy it is to walk past someone in a familiar place without seeing them. The Reverend saw a woman. The conductor did not. The conductor stood in the corridor for 3 minutes and saw nothing at all. The question is not who the woman was. The question is who, on that train, was invisible because they were expected. The Colonel came last. He sat down without ceremony. He placed his hands on his knees. He looked at Holmes with the steady, exhausted attention of a man who has decided, on the long walk to this room, that he will not lie any further. You wish to know about the letter, he said. I wish to know about everything, Colonel. But yes, we may begin with the letter. I wrote it. I paid the young man at the bookstall to deliver it. I instructed him to deliver it before Welwyn, so that Hollander would have time to read it, and to come to my compartment before Hitchin. I have done this for 3 Tuesdays. Last night was the 3rd. What did the letter say? The Colonel's mouth tightened. They said in 3 different ways the same thing. They said, I know who you are. I know what you did. I know where your daughter is. The room went very quiet. He had a daughter? He had a daughter, Mr. Holmes. He has a daughter. She is 19 years old. She lives in a small town in the south of France with a woman she believes to be her aunt. She was 7 years old when her father disappeared into the Channel. She was told he was dead. She has been told this for 12 years. She is, by every account I have been able to gather, a happy young woman. She paints watercolors. She is engaged to be married to a young man of decent prospects. She has no idea that her father is alive, and no idea that her father is the reason her mother died of grief 2 years after his disappearance. And you knew this how? Because the woman she believes to be her aunt is my sister. Because the man Hollander ruined, the man who lost everything and could not bear it, the man who shot himself in his study on a Tuesday morning in February of 1890, was my brother-in-law. My sister took the child to France because she could not bear to raise her in England, and because the child was too young to understand. My sister is not a vengeful woman, Mr. Holmes. She is a kind one. She has raised that girl as her own, and she would die before she allowed her to learn the truth. But you would not. I would not allow Hollander to walk free, Mr. Holmes. I have spent 3 years finding him. I have spent 3 weeks on this train, sitting in compartment 1, watching him walk past my door. I wrote those letters because I wanted him to know, before the end, what he had taken. I wanted him to feel, for one journey, the weight of his daughter's existence on his conscience. I wanted him to choose. Choose what? Whether to live with what he had done, or to end it. I heard from the parlor the small intake of breath that was the only sign Holmes ever gave when a piece of a case slid into place. Colonel Strake, did you go to his compartment last night? No, Mr. Holmes, I did not. Did you see him after he boarded? I saw him pass my door at King's Cross. I did not see him again. Did you cause his disappearance? The colonel was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than before. I caused him to choose, Mr. Holmes. I do not know what he chose. I have been sitting in this inn all day, waiting to be told. Holmes studied him. And the woman in the green coat? What woman? A woman in a dark green coat, smelling of rosewater, was seen in the corridor between Welwyn and Hitchin. She was not, so far as the conductor knows, a passenger on this train. The colonel's face did not change, but something behind it did. I saw it even from where I sat. Something old and terrible moved in his eyes, and then it was gone. I do not know who that woman is, Mr. Holmes. I have no female accomplice. I would not involve a woman in this. Thank you, Colonel. The colonel rose. At the door, he paused. Mr. Holmes, if he is dead, I want you to know that I did not strike the blow, but I will not pretend to grieve for him. I would not ask you to, Colonel. The door closed. Holmes sat very still for nearly a full minute. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the fog that had returned in the evening to fill the road. Watson, he said, we have 4 people who came to that train carrying the same intention in 4 different shapes: to confront him, to forgive him, to threaten him, to remind him. Each of them moved through the corridor at some point. None of them killed him, and yet he is gone. Then who is the woman in green? Holmes turned slowly from the window. I think, Watson, that the woman in green is the answer. I think she is the one piece of this puzzle that none of our 4 passengers placed there. And I think she may be the only person on that train who actually wanted Thaddeus Hollander alive. If you are still listening, and I hope you are, you may want to take a moment now to consider the train as it must have looked from above. 6 compartments, 5 occupants, 1 corridor, 1 conductor, 1 impossible disappearance. The pieces are all on the table. The reveal, when it comes, will not be loud. It will simply, finally fit. Holmes did not sleep that night. I know this because I did not sleep either, and every time I went down to the parlor, he was there, in the same chair, with the same lamp, looking at the same scrap of paper. It was the impression of Mrs. Vance's torn note. I cannot do it. I cannot face him. He read it as though he expected it, on the 100th reading, to say something different. Toward 4 in the morning, he stood up. Watson, I have been a fool. I have been looking for a person who came onto the train. I should have been looking for a person who was already there. The conductor? No. Briggs is exactly what he appears to be. A tired man who has worked the Northern Line for 20 years and who would not lie to save his pension. I mean someone else. Someone who was on that train every Tuesday night, in the same compartment, doing the same thing, and whom none of our witnesses thought to mention because they had never thought to see her. Who? The tea woman, Watson. There is always a tea woman on the late trains. She works the corridor. She wheels her cart. She knocks on doors. She is invisible to first-class passengers because she is meant to be. But Briggs brought the tea himself last night. Briggs brought 1 cup of tea, the cup intended for compartment 4. He did so because Mr. Rourke had requested it specifically of him. But the rest of the carriage would have been served by the regular woman, and she would have been in the corridor at exactly the moment we are interested in. Then I do not yet know what she did, but I know where to find her. The Northern Line keeps employment records at the depot in Camden. We shall be on the first train south. We were. By 8 in the morning, we were standing in the small clerk's office at the depot, and by 8:30, we had a name. The woman who worked the 742 from King's Cross every Tuesday night was a Mrs. Eleanor Hollander, widow, age 41, employed for the last 2 years. Hollander, I said. Hollander, Holmes confirmed. It is not an uncommon name, but it is not, on the books of the Northern Railway Company, a coincidence. She lived in a small set of rooms above a stationer's shop in Islington. The stationer told us she was at home. She had come back from the north late the previous afternoon, looking tired and had not left since. She opened the door herself. She was a slender woman with gray at her temples and the kind of face that had once been beautiful and was now only quiet. She wore a dark green skirt. She did not seem surprised to see us. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "I wondered when you would come." She made us tea. She made it carefully, the way a woman makes tea who has poured 1,000 cups for strangers and has learned that the act itself is a kind of refuge. She set the cups in front of us. She sat down opposite. She folded her hands. "My husband," she said, "was Thaddeus Hollander's elder brother, not the Reverend. There were 3 of them. The Reverend knows of 2. He does not know of the 3rd. My husband was the eldest. He was estranged from the family for 20 years. He died of consumption in a boarding house in Camden 8 years ago, before the scandal, before any of it. He left me with nothing, and a small son. The son died the following winter. I have been alone for 8 years, Mr. Holmes. And you took work on the railway." "I took work where I could. 2 years ago, I was assigned to the Northern Line. One Tuesday evening, 11 months ago, I served tea to a man in compartment 4 who looked up at me and went white as a sheet. He recognized me. I recognized him. He was my brother-in-law, whom I had met twice in 20 years and whom I had been told was dead. What did you do?" I said nothing. I poured his tea. I closed the door. I went back to my cart, and I shook for the rest of the journey. I did not know what to do. I was a widow in service. He was a man who had ruined 19 families and faked his own death. If I reported him, I would be questioned. My employment would end. I would be turned out of these rooms. I had nothing, Mr. Holmes. I had only my Tuesdays. Did he speak to you afterward? The next Tuesday he was there again. He gave me an envelope. Inside was £20. There was a note. The note said, "For your silence. There will be more each week." I took the money. I am not proud of it. I took it because I had nothing else, and because I told myself that he owed it to me, and that taking it was not the same as forgiving him. How long did this continue? 11 months. Every Tuesday. £20 in an envelope. I would knock on his door. He would hand me the envelope. I would pour his tea. We did not speak. We did not need to. And on the night of the 14th, she closed her eyes. On the night of the 14th, he opened the door before I knocked. He was already standing. He was holding a small valise. He said, "Eleanor, I need you to do one thing for me. I need you to take this and keep it safe. I will come for it when I can." He gave me the valise. He looked at me as though he were saying goodbye. Then he closed the door. "Did you open the valise?" "Not until I was home." "What was in it?" She rose. She went to a low cupboard in the corner of the room. She drew out a small brown leather valise and set it on the table between us. She opened it. Inside were 3 things: a bundle of banknotes, perhaps £200 in all, a faded photograph of a young woman of about 19, smiling in a garden, holding a small watercolor brush, and a letter sealed with wax, addressed in a careful hand. "To my daughter, on the day she learns who I was." Holmes did not touch the letter. He looked at it for a long moment. "Mrs. Hollander, what did you do after he closed the door?" "I went on with my round. I served tea in compartment 3 to the Reverend. I served tea in compartment 2 to a lady in mourning who would not look at me. I served tea in compartment 1 to a colonel who waved me away without speaking. I returned to the rear of the carriage. I waited. I felt the whole time that something terrible was happening on the other side of compartment 4's door, but I did not know what. And then, at Hitchin, I left the train, as I always do. I caught the late local back to London. I came home. I did not sleep. In the morning, the news reached me that he had vanished. I have been waiting ever since for someone to come." Holmes was silent for a long time. Then he said very gently, "Mrs. Hollander, I do not believe your brother-in-law is dead." She looked up. "I believe," Holmes said, "that he stepped out of his compartment at Welland while the train was halted for the conductor's check, walked the length of the corridor in the only 3 minutes it was unwatched, and slipped off the rear of the carriage onto the platform on the side, away from the conductor's lamp. I believe he then walked back along the dark side of the train, climbed into the rear of the goods van as it was being uncoupled for the local sidings, and rode it as far as Stevenage, where he disembarked into the fog and disappeared. But the door was locked from the corridor. He locked it himself from the inside, using a small spring mechanism of the sort that a man with his skills could easily improvise. He latched the windows. He left the cufflink as a deliberate trail, because he wanted at last to be known. He left the valise with you, because he could not bear to take his daughter into hiding with him a second time. He left the overcoat folded, because he did not need it where he was going, and because the folding of it was, perhaps, the closest thing to a goodbye he could permit himself. He is alive. He is alive. But he is not the man who stepped onto that train. Watson, do you remember what I said yesterday about a man vanishing emotionally long before he vanishes physically? I remember. Thaddeus Hollander vanished 3 years ago in the Channel. The man who has been riding the 742 for the last 11 months was already a ghost. What we have witnessed is not a disappearance. It is the moment a ghost finally noticed it had no body. Mrs. Hollander began very quietly to weep. Holmes waited. "Why now?" she asked. "Why last night?" "Because of the letters, Mrs. Hollander. 3 letters in 3 weeks. The first from his sister-in-law in mourning. The second from his brother in clerical collar. The third from a colonel whose family he had destroyed. 3 voices from the life he had buried, each of them telling him in their own way that he was still seen. He could bear being hidden. He could not bear being found by the people he had wronged. So he did the only thing left to him. He completed the disappearance. And the daughter? Holmes looked at the photograph for a long moment. The daughter must never know. Not from us. The letter is addressed to her on the day she learns. That day must not be today, and it must not be by our hand. The colonel knew this in his way. He wanted her father to suffer the knowledge of her existence. He did not want her to suffer the knowledge of her father. We shall keep the letter, Mrs. Hollander, in a safe place, and we shall give it to her if and only if the day ever comes that she asks. We left her standing in her doorway with the empty valise in her hands. In the cab back to Baker Street, Holmes was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "There is one more thing, Watson, that I have not yet told you, and that you must hear before this case is closed in your records. The woman in the green coat that the Reverend saw in the corridor was Mrs. Hollander, of course. I knew it from the moment she opened the door this morning. The rose water, the skirt. She had passed him on her tea round, and he had not registered her face, because he had not been looking for her face. But there is a second matter. The colonel's reaction when I asked him about the woman in green. He hid something. He recognized the description. He has known for some time who she was. He has known, perhaps, that she was on the train, and he chose not to tell me. I think, Watson, that the colonel had been watching Mrs. Hollander as well. I think he knew about the envelopes. I think he had decided, in his way, that her quiet extortion was a kind of justice he was willing to permit. And I think his last letter, the one Mr. Petrie delivered, contained not only a threat to Hollander, but a small mercy, a warning that if Hollander did not act, the colonel would expose the arrangement, which would destroy Mrs. Hollander as surely as it destroyed her brother-in-law. So Hollander vanished to protect her. He vanished to protect his daughter, and incidentally, to protect the woman who had been receiving £20 a Tuesday from him. He vanished in the end, because he had finally found 2 people in the world whose lives were worth more to him than his own continuing breath. It is, in its way, the only decent thing he had ever done. Will you tell the Colonel? I will tell the Colonel that the case is closed and that Thaddeus Hollander is dead. I shall tell him this in a tone that will permit him to understand exactly what I mean. He will not pursue the matter further. He has had his confrontation. He will go home to his sister in France, and he will look at his niece across the dinner table, and he will say nothing, because he will understand at last that there are some justices that are not worth their cost. We rode for a while in silence. Outside, the fog had begun to lift, and through it I could see the first weak sun of the afternoon trying to make itself felt against the rooftops. Watson, Holmes said, there is a question you have not asked me, and I shall answer it before you do. You have not asked me whether I think Thaddeus Hollander deserves what we have allowed him. I have not. He does not. He ruined 19 families. He drove at least 2 men to their deaths. He abandoned a wife who died of grief and a daughter who has spent her life believing in a father she never had. He has been, by every measure, a coward and a thief. And yet I have allowed him to walk out of this case with a new name and another country and another decade of breath, and I have done so because the alternative was to break a young woman's heart with a truth she did not ask for. I do not know, Watson, if I have been just today. I know only that I have been kind, and that kindness and justice are not always the same word. Will it sit easily with you? It will not, but it will sit. That is, perhaps, the most a man can ask of his conscience, that it not be easy, but that it be possible to live with. I have written this account many years after the events it describes. I have written it because I believe, as Holmes did, that there are mysteries whose solutions belong in the world, and there are mysteries whose solutions belong in a locked drawer until the people they would harm are beyond harming. The young woman in the south of France married her young man. She had, last I heard, 2 children of her own. She still paints watercolors. She has not, to this day, asked the question that would unlock the drawer. The Colonel died 4 years after the events of the 14th, peacefully, in his sister's house, with his niece reading to him at the bedside. He never spoke of Hollander again, not even to me, and I had occasion to see him twice in those years. The Reverend Cobb continued in his small parish until his retirement. He wrote me a letter once on the anniversary of the case, in which he said only, I forgave him in the end, not for his sake, for mine. Mrs. Vance left mourning the spring after the case. She remarried at 50, a kind man who knew her history and did not flinch from it. She wrote to me on her wedding day. I have decided, she wrote, that my husband would not have wanted me to wear black on his account forever. I have decided that the living owe something to the living too. Mr. Petrie, the runner, came to a poor end in a public house in Bermondsey 2 years later, in a manner I shall not describe here. He was, in the end, exactly the small man he had pretended not to be. Mrs. Hollander left the railway. Holmes saw to it, quietly, that she received a small annuity from a source she was permitted to believe was a charitable trust. She lived another 15 years in the rooms above the stationer's shop, and she died in her sleep, with the empty valise still on her cupboard shelf and the letter to the daughter still sealed inside it. The letter is in my desk now, in a drawer I do not open often. It is addressed still to my daughter on the day she learns who I was. I do not know if that day will ever come. I suspect it will not. I suspect the letter will be burned eventually by whoever inherits this desk after me, and that they will burn it without reading it, because they will not know what it is. That, perhaps, is the truest ending this story can have. A man who spent his life hiding behind names finally writes, in his own hand, the truth of who he was, and the truth is sealed in wax and placed in a drawer, and no one ever reads it, and the world continues without it. He wanted, at the end, to be known. He arranged his disappearance so that he might leave one honest sentence behind. and the sentence will, in all likelihood, never be read. Holmes said something to me, the evening of the day we returned from Islington, that I have thought of often in the years since. We were sitting by the fire. The fog had returned, as it always did. He was looking at the small brass cufflink, which he had kept as a memento of the case. "Watson," he said, "I have spent my life believing that the truth is the highest good a man can offer another. I am no longer certain. I think now that the truth is a very heavy gift, and that it should be given only to those who have asked for it, and only by those who are willing to stay and help carry it. We did not give the truth to that young woman in France, and I do not think we were wrong. But I do think we were something else. I think we were merciful, and I think mercy is a smaller word than justice, and I think I shall have to make my peace with that." He set the cufflink down on the mantel. It is still there, I believe, in whatever rooms now stand on the site of the old Baker Street lodgings. A small piece of brass, engraved with 2 letters that belonged to a man who chose at last to stop being himself, and who in the choosing became, perhaps for the first time in his life, almost a good one. The 7:42 from King's Cross still runs. The fog still settles between Welwyn and Hitchin on November nights. The compartments are different now, and the gas lamps have been replaced with electric, and the tea is no longer brought by hand. But sometimes, when I take that train, I sit in compartment 4 and I watch the dark country slide past the window, and I think about how easy it is for a man to disappear between 2 stations, and how much easier it is for him to have disappeared long before he ever boarded. We are, all of us, riding between stations. We are, all of us, carrying false names of one kind or another, the small lies we have told ourselves about who we are and what we have done and what we have permitted. The mystery is not how a man vanishes from a locked compartment. The mystery is how any of us remain visible to ourselves at all, given how much of ourselves we have spent a lifetime trying to hide. Thaddeus Hollander solved that mystery in his own way, on a Tuesday night in November, by stepping off a train and into a fog and never coming back. I do not recommend his solution, but I understand it now in a way I did not when I was younger, and I think Holmes understood it too, and I think that understanding is the closest any of us came, in that case or any other, to the truth. The fire has burned low as I finish writing this. The fog is at the window. Somewhere a train is leaving a station. Somewhere a man is sitting in a first-class compartment with a name that is not his own, looking at his reflection in the dark glass and not recognizing it. I wish him, whoever he is, the courage to be known, or the mercy of being permitted to disappear. I wish him, at the very least, the small gift of a letter sealed in wax and placed in a drawer, so that on the day he chooses, the truth will still be there, waiting in his own hand. That, I have come to think, is all any of us can leave behind. A sealed letter, a pair of cufflinks on a mantel, a folded coat on an empty seat, the shape of who we were, set down carefully in a place where it might someday be found by someone who can bear to read it. The train pulls away. The fog closes behind it. The compartment is empty. And somewhere between the stations, a man finally goes home.